Thank you, President Carter. We will have questions from the audience. I would ask you to identify yourselves. There's 4 microphones. Identify yourselves. Ask, please, brief questions so that a lot of people can have a chance. Don't make long statements. Just ask brief questions, and President Carter will answer them as they emerge. Let's start right here in front.
You might help me understand the question with a lot of accent. Okay.
President Carter, my name is Karam Karam. In retrospect, and I've read your book, and we enjoyed it tremendously, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. In retrospect, if you go back to 1977 and Camp David, do you think that it was conducted prematurely, and that if other Arab countries were involved in that Camp David Accord, that the peace could have been achieved in a better way and be more lasting? And the second part of the question is, you referred to the UN resolutions, and there is a resolution 149 that states the rights of Palestinians to return. Do you think that this is a thorny issue still, and that the Geneva meeting that was conducted a few years ago did not give it enough importance? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I don't think that the Camp David Accords that we negotiated was proved to be successful in the end, because unfortunately it was divided into 2 parts, ultimately. At first it was just dealing with Palestinian rights. And I didn't have a chance to stay in office long enough to use my influence to, I would start to say, force to encourage the Israelis to comply with their withdrawal. When I left office after just 1 4-year term, President Reagan didn't show much interest in the Middle East, and the settlement building began to increase on the Palestinian land, and obviously the Palestinians were never given any full autonomy, which was a requirement under Camp David. I tried very hard to get other Arab leaders to participate. At that time, King Hussein was under great pressure from other Arabs not to participate. And President Assad was not friendly with President Sadat, as you may know. Privately, a number of the Arab leaders came to me and said, we can't support you publicly, but go ahead with the effort. I won't call their names because some of them are still living, but I had a wide range of Arab leaders who publicly condemned Sadat after he concluded the peace treaty, and but who were completely supportive. So I did the best I could, and at least the treaty has survived. When I later got fully acquainted with Yasser Arafat, he told me that the worst political mistake he made in his life was not supporting the Camp David Accords, because it gave his people everything they could have wanted at that time: full autonomy, control over their own affairs, and complete withdrawal by Israel from the occupied territories. But it was not an acceptable thing to do among the Arab leaders to even talk to the Israelis or negotiate with them. So maybe, as you suggested, I was ahead of my time, and it would have been better later on. And yeah, 194 was a resolution, as you know, passed in the General Assembly, not in the UN Security Council. But I consider 194 to still be binding, and that is assumed to be still applicable to the area. There's one departure of the Geneva Accords from what is normally assumed to be 194, and that is that the Geneva Accords recommends that Palestinians return to the West Bank and Gaza freely. and that Palestinians return to Israel only if individual family applications are approved, which leaves it in Israel's hands. But also advocate that any Palestinian denied the right to come back into I'll say the Holy Land, would be compensated fully according to the International Court of Claims, and recommends that a massive sum of money, maybe several billions of dollars, would be obtained from the Arab nations, from Japan, from Europe, from the United States, and placed in this fund. I'm familiar with this Court of Claims. It works beautifully. To go back into other matters of my administration, when my hostages were taken by Iran, I confiscated $12 billion of Iranian money that they had deposited in the part of the world that I could influence, including $2 billion in gold bullion in the Bank of England. And we established an agreement between me and Ayatollah Khomeini that legitimate American claims would be paid through the International Court of Claims. And within 7 years, every claim that had been filed against Iran was paid. So I think that would be one way to resolve that question, which is not complete, of Arabs, Palestinians not being given full rights to move back into Israel, but some of them might be accepted to go back into Israel, and others would be fully compensated.
Sir Carter, my name is Farouk Jabr. I'd like to ask your opinion about the Quartet and what happened, because the Quartet was a good group of countries working to advance in the negotiations with the Palestinians. But during their work, we found out later through the De Soto report how really the intentions that were at the start of the Quartet were undermined. And it was a very tough report, and you know it.
I know, I'm familiar with it.
And do you think that anything can be still salvaged from that effort of the Quartet?
Well,
thank you.
Yes. As you all may know, the Quartet spelled out in the so-called roadmap a step-by-step orderly procedure that was supposed to lead in a timely fashion to a final agreement, a final end of the road that would have required Israel to comply completely with the terms of the United Nations resolutions. Unfortunately, the Quartet other members have deferred to the United States. The European Union, in my opinion, has abandoned its responsibilities, as has the United Nations and Russia. And they have said, we'll let the United States represent the Quartet. And in the last few years, since 2003, the United States has not been forceful in implementing the terms of the Quartet provision. And that can change. The Quartet will meet again on December the 15th, just 2 or 3 days from now. And they'll be meeting regularly in the future after Barack Obama is president. And I think that if the United States ever would say, and I hope they will, let's implement the Quartet's decision, and the United States would take the leadership, in my opinion, the United Nations and the European Union and Russia would join in with great enthusiasm to force Israel under international law to comply. But I think I've answered your question quite accurately. At this moment, the United States position in dealing with Israel has been, by default, the representation of the Quartet, which I think was a serious mistake. All the members should have been very forceful in saying, let's impose what we decided.
Over there.
Excellency, President. My name is Joe Karam. I'm a lawyer. It's another Karam. Your Excellency, were you expecting negative consequences on the Lebanese scene after Camp David as administration? And my other question, do you think the Israeli society is ready to commit to real peace? Thank you.
That's a very interesting question. I can't go any further than I already have concerning what happened after Camp David. I thought when I left office that the Camp David terms would be implemented, but they were not. And I've not had any authority since then. But yes, there have been repetitive public opinion polls run in Israel that showed that roughly 60% of the Israeli public is in favor of exchanging so-called land for peace, that is, withdrawing from the occupied territories in exchange for the kind of peace that has been offered to Israel by, say, the Arab countries. And that's been a fairly consistent public opinion polling result. There have been some aberrations up and down, depending on the level of violence during, say, the Second Intifada. But that's pretty much the same. I saw a poll just recently that said that 56% of the Israelis would accept something of this kind. And so I don't think there's any doubt that if we ever see an Israeli leader able to negotiate with Abu Mazen or whoever represents the Palestinians, and they reach that conclusion with the assurance that Israel's public can be protected, the answer is, to your question, is yes, the Israeli public would support it. I didn't go into detail because I wanted to save time, but one of the worst things that's happened in the last number of years has been an aberration or distortion of a decision that Yitzhak Rabin made. He decided that in order to protect the Israeli public, that a wall should be built along the so-called Green Line or the pre-1967 border, which was approved by the International Court of Justice. And then he was assassinated, as you know, and Sharon became prime minister. And he began to move the wall eastward, deep into the West Bank, sometimes 20 kilometers. This wall goes into the West Bank to encompass strategic parts of the occupied territories and to surround illegal Israeli settlements that are already there. And this is a project that has still continuing. And as you know, the Israelis also completely control the Jordan River Valley. And this wall is supposed to, will eventually be roughly 700 kilometers long, winding around like a snake. And the ends of it will attach to the two ends of the Jordan River Valley, so that in the future, when this wall is completed, all of the Palestinians remaining in the portion of the West Bank they still control will be imprisoned, just like the Palestinians in Gaza are now completely imprisoned within a wall. To me, this entire process is an international crime, and it should be condemned and corrected by the international community. But that's what... At the same time, within the occupied territories, there are now about roughly 205 settlements. And these settlements, very carefully placed all over the West Bank, are connected by highways. Sometimes the highways are four-lane highways, like the one running along your east coast and along your west coast. And these highways at first are used by Israelis and Palestinians. As time has gone on, the Palestinians have been forbidden to use the highways. And in extreme cases, the Palestinians are not permitted to cross the highways. So this leaves the entire West Bank like a vast number of cantonments, each isolated from the other, and the Israelis are using the highways that the Palestinians can't use. This was opposed by the Israeli Supreme Court until recently. But earlier this year, the Supreme Court of Israel ruled that this policy was permissible, ostensibly for the protection of Israel's security. But the particular highway involved runs partially through Israel and partially through the West Bank, and it's only used for the convenience of commuters who are Israelis to go back and forth into Jerusalem. And Palestinians are now forbidden by law to ride on or walk on the highway that was originally built just for them. So the advancing confiscation of land and the persecution of Palestinians continues. At the time of Annapolis Conference, which was supposed to be a new era in progress toward peace, there were about 500 checkpoints, so-called, on the roads inside the West Bank. And they were supposed to be frozen, and no more settlements were supposed to be built. There's been a rash of new settlements built. And instead of 500 checkpoints, there are now 630 checkpoints. So the stranglehold on the Palestinians is increasing.
Yeah. My name is Mariam Kereke, and I just want to know, how could Israel look forward to a peaceful future as long as the people they stole their country from live right next door to them?
Could you hold the microphone closer to your mouth?
How can Israel look to a peaceful future?
I want to know, how can Israel look forward to a peaceful future as long as the people they stole their country from live right next door to them?
In my new book, I wrote a chapter that will explain that, and but I'm going to give you a summary of it. I'm not going to require you to buy my book in order to get the answer. As all of you probably know, Israel, the nation of Israel, was established as a Jewish state with the contemplation by the United Nations and the international community, with which you may disagree from the beginning, that the surrounding area would be occupied by Arabs, many of whom were Christian, but with other faiths, Islam and so forth. And the Israelis decided early, including former Prime Minister Barak and present Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, that there were two choices to be made. One was to have a small nation that was Israel, where Jews living there and moving there from Europe and other places, particularly the Soviet Union or Russia, would constantly comprise a majority of Jews. That was the dream, and that's still the hope. The other option, though, that has been condemned by every responsible Israeli leader is a one-state solution, with just one nation between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, ostensibly to be controlled still by Jews. But the demographic trends are that within a few years, no one knows exactly how many years, less than 20, the majority of the total population in that area will be non-Jews, Arabs and others. And so if they are given equal voting rights, then the government decisions would be made by those who are not Jewish. So the one-state solution, in my opinion, is what's being evolved now, because the Israelis are not willing to give up the occupied territories. And there are just a few 100,000 difference now. As far as voting age is concerned, though, the Arab population is much younger than the Jewish population. And so it would take a few more years to have an Arab majority. So that would mean that you would have a single state, and if it remained Jewish, then the Arab population would not be given equal votes, although they would be citizens of the one state. So it's an extremely complicated situation. I think that with the establishment of the nation of Israel in 1948-49, the vision there was for there to be a single Jewish state, living in harmony with the Arabs and others around them. And the constant expansion of Israeli control has been what has created the present crisis. But I'm not trying to convince you that it was wise to establish Israel in the first place. It was done, and that's beside the point. And we can't undo that, and I don't think anyone in my country at least would want to do that. Neither would I, by the way. But we would like to see Israel living side by side with a free and independent and contiguous and prosperous Palestinian state, where Palestinians who are now incarcerated in refugee camps, including your country, could move back home or either be compensated fully for the property that was taken from them.
My name is Nadli Alam, editor-chief of the AUB student newspaper Outlook. I was wondering if you thought that Arab countries are undermining efforts for peace by prematurely opening economic and diplomatic channels with Israel.
Could you repeat it again? It wasn't clear.
If Arabs are undermining peace by
Do you think Arab countries are undermining peace by prematurely opening economic and diplomatic channels with Israel?
No, I don't think so. I really feel that the offer that has been made by the Arab countries, first in 2002, and then repeated since then to Israel, to have full diplomatic relations with Israel and full trade and commerce with Israel is a contribution to peace. I don't think that creates an obstacle to peace. And I might add, it's quite interesting that shortly after that first offer was made in 2002, at a gathering of all the Islamic countries, I think there are 52 of them, including those like Indonesia that are Islamic but not Arab, they also voted unanimously to recognize Israel's right to exist in peace within the 67 borders. It's interesting to note that the one who made the motion for that was the president of Iran, Khatami, at that time. So you have not only the 22 Arab countries, but about 30 other Islamic countries, all of whom have said to Israel, if you want to live within your legal borders, we'll have full diplomatic relations with you and complete friendship with you and complete trade and commerce with you. I think that offer is a very generous offer, difficult for some, and within some modifications of exactly the 67 borders, I think that would be something that could be acceptable and would be approved by a substantial majority of Israeli citizens. The problem in Israel, obviously, is very militant settlers who believe that the covenant between Abraham and the Israeli people, the Israelites, gives them a right to all of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And the other problem is leaders in Israel, political leaders, who don't want to confront that militant group and their supporters within their own country. But I think the only way to get around that is to have extremely strong positive influence from the United States, because Israel is heavily dependent on friendship with the President of the United States and our government in order for its military defense and for its economic well-being as well. So the United States can bring possibly to the Israelis and to their neighbors a solution to the problem that would be beneficial to Israelis and their neighbors.
Can I ask
Lady with the mic, go ahead.
Okay. President Carter, my name is Dana Balut. This is the second time I actually hear you speak, and each time is enlightening. And so thank you for being here. I have two questions. My first question is why you think Hezbollah refused to meet with you, even though you do negotiate with Hamas, which could be considered their ally, and you're not exactly an ally of Israel after your book. And my second question is, how much hope do you have in President-elect Barack Obama, with, especially when he gave that speech to AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, saying that Jerusalem, and all of Jerusalem, would be the capital of Israel, which is obviously something that the Palestinians would not agree to. And he elected Rahm Emanuel as chief of staff, who is very right-wing Zionist and whose father has claimed that Arabs mopped the floors of the White House.
I can't answer your first question. We came here with the hope that we could meet with all of the political parties and factions in Lebanon, just to offer our services to monitor the election that's going to be held in May or June. And I didn't come to beg anybody. If the leaders of Hezbollah wanted to meet with me along with other parties, I would have been delighted. But since they chose not to, I've understood from other sources, some of their supporters, the other parties that are affiliated with them, that they have no objection to the Carter Centers participating in the election. So I can't answer you why they didn't want to meet with me, but it's not all that important to me to meet with everybody, since if we do get approval from the ministers to participate. As far as Barack Obama is concerned, I was perhaps the most disturbed American out of 350 million when he made his speech to AIPAC. I was really taken aback by it, because he went further than other political leaders in our country had done. I called him on the phone immediately after that and told him that I was distressed. And within just a few hours, he made a statement to CNN television and said that he explained what he meant. And he explained it by saying what he meant was that there shouldn't be barbed wire on the streets of East Jerusalem and so forth. So I think he clarified what he meant. As far as Rahm Emanuel is concerned, yes, he is closely affiliated with Israel. I understand his father served in the Israeli army, and he'll be chief of staff. But I think that another hopeful sign is that General Jim Jones will be his national security advisor. And that will be a very close and intimate relationship that will involve all aspects of foreign policy. Mrs. Clinton, who will be Secretary of State, has also been quite close to AIPAC's position in the past. She represents the state of New York, where AIPAC is more powerful and influential than any other state. But I think that that Jim Jones is thoroughly familiar with the situation in Palestine. As you may know, he was the one who orchestrated the new and very successful effort to take Palestinians to Jordan and to give them superb training in a police to act as police. and they have now been stationed in 2 communities in the West Bank and are performing beautifully and taking over responsibilities for security from the Israeli army to the Palestinians. And Abu Mazen has been pleased with them, and so have the Israelis been pleased with them. So I think that you don't have any way to know what effect the subordinates of a president might have done in the past as a guide to what the president himself will do in the future. So I still have no reason to doubt the commitment of Barack Obama to move early in his term on the Middle East, and I have hopes and expectations that he will take a strong stand in favor of forceful American influence to bring about peace in accordance with the existing American policy, the Quartet's policy, the United Nations resolutions, and take advantage of the Arab offer of peace. That's my hope and my dream, and I might say the subject of my prayers.
Mr. President, it's Christine Habib from UTV. My first question is, what future do you see for the negotiations going on between Syria and Israel, and what effect would it have on Lebanon? My second question is, what's so special and different in this electoral season that made you choose to monitor it this spring? Thank you.
Well, as you may know, the peace talks between Syria and Israel concerning the Golan Heights have not been supported in the last 8 years by America. And they have been carried out indirectly by the sponsorship of Turkey. When I was with President Assad in April was when this information was revealed to the public. And later, the Israelis acknowledged that the peace talks were going on. President Assad told me at that time that he didn't see any prospect for ultimate success until America was directly involved and would give full support to the peace talks for the Golan Heights. The terms of agreement between Syria and Israel on the Golan Heights has long been known. In fact, as early as 1983, I went to Syria and met with Hafiz al-Assad, the president's father. And he made I knew all about the issue, and he made some very important agreement with me. And I delivered that proposal to then Prime Minister Shamir, who was not interested in the process. Since then, I'd say about 10 years later, 12 years later, there was a fairly complete agreement negotiated between Israel and Syria, outlining the details of the process. One of the most serious problems was Syria's demand that they would not give up any of their sovereign territory that existed before 1967. And that went all the way to the shores of Lake Tiberias, or we call it Lake Galilee. That issue has now been basically resolved by the force of nature, in that a heavy use of water for irrigation has lowered the level of Tiberias enough to expose some new land that could be used by the Israelis to go north and south on the east side of the lake. So I see a very clear opportunity to resolve all the previous differences between Israel and Syria over the Golan Heights. I might add, though, I don't want to be too optimistic, that this particular withdrawal is perhaps the most unpopular among Israeli citizens. Many of them in public opinion polls indicate that they would rather withdraw from the West Bank than to withdraw from the Golan Heights. But I still think that it can be done, again, with a proviso that America play a very strong mediation role and encourage both sides to comply. So Assad's public position has been that those talks would be held in abeyance until after a new election had been taken place in America, which is now done, and also in Israel, which will probably be early in February. We don't know. But I see the possibilities there for a resolution of that question. As far as Lebanon is concerned, there's no insinuation or no thought on the part of the Carter Center that there's any problem at all with Lebanon conducting a completely successful choice of leaders as scheduled at the end of the spring, in May or perhaps the first week in June. But the Carter Center offers our services to nations around the world who might welcome international observers to come in from many sources. So if we are approved, we would come in here and join perhaps some representatives from the Arab League or perhaps some representatives from the European Union. And so they would have a good number of domestic observers. The Minister of Interior mentioned to us the other day 2,500 or so trained domestic election observers that would be scattered all over the country on election day to ensure that it was honest and fair. And I think what the international observers do primarily is to discourage any sort of intimidation of voters or potential violence during the process. So if we are approved, for instance, to observe the election, it would be my thought as early as next month to send in 3 or 4 what we call long-term observers who would begin to study your country and the political processes and the different topography and the different communities and your very complex election procedures so that when my wife and I come back, maybe as observers, along with 50 or 60 or 70 other people, those long-term observers could put us through an intense education program so that on election day we would understand the process and help to ensure what I already feel confident will be a successful election.
Concerning, for example, the president's influence in Israel, I mean, clearly President Obama has a new opinion. There's also the rise of Iran. There's the talks between Syria and Israel. I just want to know, who are the new main actors in this whole issue, in your opinion, and what's each one of them's position concerning all of this?
Well, I don't know how to predict who will be the main actors in the future, but it's obvious to me that Iran will have an influence on the commitment of some of the Palestinians to the peace process. And it may be that Syria would have an influence, too, on some of the Palestinian groups or citizens. One of the encouraging things to me when I met with the Hamas leaders in April in Damascus was that they stated that any agreement, peace agreement, negotiated between Abu Mazen and the Israelis would be accepted by them if that agreement was later submitted to the Palestinian population in a referendum, and the Palestinian people approved of it, even if the Hamas leaders did not like parts of the agreement. That was very encouraging to me. And I came back to Jerusalem a day later, 2 days later, and I announced this to the public, and at the same time, the leader of Hamas in Damascus made a public statement to that effect. So that was a new development that was very encouraging. The alternative to that, instead of having a referendum, would be for there to be a democratic election in Palestine once again, as it was in January of 2006, when Hamas candidates could participate. And so the unity government that would include several factions of Palestinians, if they approved the peace agreement that would be acceptable to Hamas. The public opinion polls in the Palestinian area, including Gaza, have shown an overwhelming desire to have the two-state solution implemented, with the Palestinians having an independent and contiguous, manageable nation alongside Israel and living in peace with Israel. The other new players, obviously, would be the new American administration. I think that's the most important, as I've said several times this evening. And we don't know what's going to happen yet concerning the presidency of the Palestinian Authority, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, or the PLO. As you may know, Abu Mazen's term expires in January. And we don't yet know whether he will remain on as president or if another one would have to be elected. So that would be an uncertainty. But let me close my evening comments by saying I don't consider myself an oracle or authority on the subject. It's a very complex authority, and I'm sure many of you know more about the subject than do I, certainly for certain portions of it. But I think the main message that I bring is that peace is necessary, not only for Israel and the Palestinians, but for the entire Middle East, for the entire region, indeed the entire world. I think that the primary cause of a demonstrated terrorism that we've seen in many places on earth in several recent years, that if the Palestinian issue was resolved peacefully and with justice and human rights, I think a great deal of animosity against my country and Western nations would be alleviated. So I look on the possibility and the need for peace to be important not just for Lebanon and Syria and Israel and the Palestinians, but for the entire world. And my hope is that if the United States should default on our position of leadership, that others would fill that vacuum and use the full influence of the world to bring about peace. But I still believe that it's very hopeful that our new president will take that leadership role and not disappoint any of us. And I hope that all of you here will give support, even though you might have very deep feelings of animosity and prejudice, say, against Israel, that you will look upon the right of Israel to live in peace and with its citizens secure, in harmony with its neighbors, is something that you would accept perhaps reluctantly, but accept in order to get peace for everyone else. And that's the same thing I always urge the Israelis to do, to accept a peace proposal, even if you don't like all the terms of it, because it's better for you as well as your neighbors. We know that in the Christian Bible, it says that peacemakers shall be called the children of God. And I think that applies to people who worship in other ways as well. I think people of all faiths, or even no faith, would be called the children of God who promote peace. And I hope that will be one of the results of my offering this evening. All of us will join together with a degree of love and care and compassion and forgiveness, looking to the future for a time of peace in God's holy land, which you occupy along with others. Thank you very much.